The griffin, a fearsome female creature born on the Flame Mountain, had gained a reputation for her psychic abilities with humans after consuming countless minds. The Koopas provided her with fresh human challenges, allowing her to taste the aspiring shadows. Those who impressed her received the coveted reward and indestructible body as her blessing. Beyond her role as a gatekeeper, the griffin held a soft spot for gold and gems, along with a fierce love for her wing-injured cub. Sal, undeterred by her intimidating aura, seized the chance to tame her. As he scaled the mountain, he swung his blade fiercely, but was repelled by the griffin's fierce wind magic, which hurled him to the cliff's edge. Clinging to a ledge, he realized he was far too young and physically limited to match her in direct combat, so he devised a plan to use her powers to reach her den. Observing her buildup of energy for another gust, he braced himself and let the force launch him to the higher cliff, enabling him to reach the griffin's cave. Within, Sal stumbled upon her cub, the tiny creature eyeing him warily. When the griffin stormed in and saw her child threatened by Sal's sword, she demanded to know his intentions. Calmly, Sal assured her that he posed no threat. Instead, he offered to heal the cub's wings in exchange for her help. Hesitant but hopeful, the griffin agreed to the condition. While the griffin hovered at the entrance, Enos and his assistant, assuming Sal had met his end, casually headed up the mountain, eagerly discussing their report to Alan. Suddenly, Sal appeared before them, riding the griffin. The trainer's expression shifted from shock to horror as Sal coldly declared he'd be sending them to the afterlife instead. With a ruthless smirk, he watched as the griffin tore through his former tormentors. After fulfilling her part of their bargain, the griffin awaited Sal's promised aid, which required venturing into a dungeon at the mountain's northern edge. She brought him to its entrance, a massive iron door concealing ancient secrets. As agreed, Sal would retrieve the legendary sword Persis and, in return, bring her Medusa's blood, a potent healing elixir. However, Sal's true goal was the sword itself. Assisting the griffin was secondary at best. He stepped through the dungeon's doors, illuminated by beams of sunlight, which revealed a Gorgon statue alongside 3 petrified warriors. The statues came to life and charged at her. She spread her paws and screamed, wondering when the stones had animated. The protagonist ran, shouting that he didn't know either. The griffin swung her paws, shattering one statue, but to their horror, the fragments reassembled into a new statue. Both the protagonist and the griffin were stunned, exclaiming at the statue's ability to change structure. He fell to the ground in fear, muttering about their merciless, terrifying nature. The 3 statues, lacking facial features, resembled the mythical Grey Sisters, sharing a single eye and tooth. Like Medusa, they were daughters of a sea god and could control water. Seeing one statue enveloped in water, the protagonist urged the griffin to flee. As she ran from a massive wave, she exclaimed about the futility of their situation. They needed a sword, he said, and began searching frantically while she worried the ceiling would collapse and bury them alive. Noticing runes on the wall, he speculated they might hold a solution. With a smirk, he realized the dungeon could collapse, burying everything beneath. Running toward a portal, he recalled a secret passage he discovered in his past life, but lacked the strength to reach it. Abruptly, he pointed to the ceiling, telling the griffin that the runes indicated they must remove the eye above to stop the statue's attacks. She flew up, grabbing the eye with her beak. Meanwhile, one statue continued raging, seizing her, and her body began to disintegrate. Landing, the griffin noticed the statue's body turn into water and remarked on the strange sight. The protagonist approached, explaining that Perseus learned of Medusa's location after stealing the Grey Sister's eye, making it their weakness. She asked where the sword was, what blood might heal her child, and how the eye could help. Smiling, he pointed to a sword behind a Medusa statue, noting that when Perseus severed Medusa's head with it, red and green blood flowed red, a deadly poison, and green, a healing elixir. But he warned that once the sword appeared in the dungeon, Medusa would resurrect. At that moment, Medusa's eyes opened, and she attacked with her snakes. A massive dust cloud erupted as Medusa struck the griffin, and the protagonist bolted for the portal, thinking it was time to escape. Yet, he knew that only by decapitating her with Perseus' sword could Medusa be stopped. Realizing he was pursued, he turned and leaped aside, narrowly dodging her attack. Spotting only one Medusa, he wondered where the griffin had gone, then noticed a small griffin peeking from behind a stone, exclaiming how terrifying the creature was. Surprised, he mused that the griffin could shrink. Just then, Medusa lunged, and several of her snakes struck the ground. He dodged, grateful for his past life's knowledge of the dungeon's layout. Spotting two suits of armor, he set his sights on the Knights of the Round Table shield. With its reflective surface, he could avoid direct eye contact with Medusa, and it could withstand her blows. Grabbing the shield, he crouched behind it as Medusa fired beams from her eyes. Struggling under the impact, he eventually was thrown back, coughing up blood. Realizing the shield alone wouldn't be enough, he noticed Medusa had destroyed the dungeon exit. Dodging her next strike, he dashed for the sword, doubting he could wield it, but resolved to try, even if it cost him his life. Reaching the sword, he grasped the hilt, astonished that he could lift it effortlessly. At that moment, one of Medusa's snakes pierced his chest, and his hand went limp. She brought him close, but he seemed unfazed, thinking back to the struggles that shaped him. Suddenly, he remembered Alan's bullying and how they'd once stolen his talent with amnesia magic. Realizing his talent was now truly his, a surge of energy surrounded him. The griffin peeked out from her hiding place, marveling that he had emerged from Medusa's grip unharmed. The protagonist's chest wound healed, and, with a fierce look, he beheaded Medusa. As her head fell, Medusa thought he was nothing short of a monster. Collecting the green blood in a flask, he recalled that his swordsmanship level was once S-class until Alan's mother used magic to steal it for her son, erasing his memories afterward. Now, knowing the truth, he laughed hysterically, prompting the griffin to wonder what was wrong with him. Grinning, he vowed revenge on Alan and his family, a resolve that worried the griffin. Deciding it was best to distance herself from this crazy boy, she turned to leave, but he called her back. Addressing him with unexpected respect, she asked why he'd called her, then caught herself, wondering why an S-level monster like her would fear him at all. The protagonist asked if her head was strong enough, leaving her momentarily perplexed before he revealed his plan. Returning to her original size, she used her head to break through the cave wall, allowing them both to escape. As they exited, she grudgingly acknowledged that he'd used her from the start to destroy the dungeon. However, since he promised to treat her cub, she decided to let it slide. Inside, the cave collapsed, and Medusa's crushed head among the rubble emitted energy that triggered a seal on the floor, causing Medusa to open her eyes once more. The protagonist re-entered the cave, and the griffin, with wings outstretched, blessed him, granting him an indestructible body. He noticed that minor wounds now healed on their own, and that his durability would allow him to conceal his regained talent from Alan's mother. To avoid drawing attention to himself, he needed to keep his newfound power hidden. Taking out the flask, he offered Medusa's blood to the griffin for her cub, explaining that it would heal the cub's wings. Cautiously, the young griffin emerged, drank, and soon rose into the air with a joyful cry. His mother was overjoyed, saying he could finally fly. The protagonist dryly commented that if the cub didn't find an owner by adulthood, he'd only be an ordinary bird. The griffin questioned him, and he shrugged, saying it was just a warning, pointing out that she herself only gained strength after finding an owner. She fell silent, realizing he was right if her owner hadn't fed her. She'd never have developed her soul. After a pause, she looked at him and asked if he would accept her cub as his magical pet, noting that he was more powerful and clever than his peers, with potential to surpass even the legendary Brad, smirking. The protagonist thought she had taken his bait and agreed, but on the condition that she tell him everything about Brad Cooper and the location of the precious key to his vault. Meanwhile, Madame was enraged, questioning how her son, Alan, had mysteriously collapsed twice. The butler reassured her, explaining that thanks to the Chateau oath, any harm was absorbed by Chateau familiars, allowing her son to recover quickly. Though she found it reassuring, she was beginning to sense something strange, as Alan had changed noticeably since the Chateau ceremony. Doug, the butler, interrupted her thoughts with unexpected news. Sal Cooper had not only aced the test exam, as they predicted, but had also used a griffin to kill the walkers and tame a young griffin. Stunned, she nearly choked on her tea before regaining composure. Placing her cup down, she asked Doug to summon Sal, who soon entered and stopped at the door. She inquired why he'd killed the walkers, and he replied with a wicked smile that it was for their family's good, adding that any Chateau trainer who couldn't survive a 3-year-old child wasn't needed by their family. Seeing his defiant expression, devoid of fear, she suspected he had a hidden advantage. Smiling, she directed the butler to reward him and send him to the healing springs of Eden. The protagonist bowed and thanked Madame for her generosity, hiding his inner surprise and feeling fortunate. After he left, Madame ordered Doug to hasten the study of magic deprivation they needed to steal Sal's talent and bestow it on her son before the inheritance ceremony of Brad's sword. She reflected that if Alan's lack of natural fencing talent was exposed, he could face this inheritance. For now, she decided to let that little fool have his moment, curious to see how audacious he could become. Arriving at the Eden Springs, Sal found himself in an expansive bathhouse among other children. He recalled the griffin's parting words Master Brad had, before his death, used Forbidden's magic to seal his soul at the bottom of Eden Springs, intending to pass on his accumulated knowledge and fencing skills to an heir with an S-rank talent. The griffin explained that Sal would find an underwater cave, and within it, a key that would guide him to her master. However, she warned that Brad wielded blood magic of formidable power he would struggle to match. As Sal mulled over the griffin's words, a boy in the water whispered to his friend, pointing out Sal as the top-ranked qualifier who tamed a baby griffin. Lucian, the servant of Reno, interrupted, mocking Sal as just a bastard. Reno, son of the groom, congratulated Sal mockingly, comparing him to a monkey. Although he ignored their jeers, Sal remembered in his past life how Alan had sent these two as allies, only for them to fabricate charges against him and betray him as a traitor. Growing angry, Reno raised his fist, sneering that he'd taste if Sal's indestructible body was truly unbreakable. However, Sal grabbed his fist mid-air and met his gaze with a steely look. As Reno grew uneasy, Sal abruptly offered to help him find out, raising Reno's hand sharply. Screaming, Reno's friend panicked, drawing a knife in a desperate move, but in a swift motion, Reno found himself shielded by Sal. Blood poured as Reno froze in horror, the knife embedded in his chest. Sal, smiling, apologized, claiming it had all been accidental. Pushing Reno's body onto Lucian, he sent both boys toppling into the healing waters, commenting that they were lucky this water could heal wounds, and they'd still be useful for training. As Reno began sinking, dark energy crawled around his body. Sal observed the strange streams with suspicion, recognizing it as Forbidden's black magic, similar to blood magic, which had somehow tainted the healing springs. Seeing this, he hesitated, realizing he'd need an alternate method to reach the spring's depths without directly touching the water. Just then, a familiar voice cried out for help. Glancing over, he saw a servant girl being yanked by her hair as she pleaded, apologizing for a minor mistake while her assailant threatened punishment. Andrea didn't want further trouble, but Sal recognized her right away. Before her assailant could finish his taunt, a swift vertical slash appeared across his body, splitting him in two. The bathhouse filled with panic screams as the children scrambled out, yelling that someone had been killed and calling for the gods. Sal extended his hand to Andrea, asking if she was all right. In her eyes, he looked like a prince from a story, but Sal, noticing her fear, awkwardly scratched the back of his head, apologizing for startling her. She reassured him, expressing deep gratitude for saving her, then introduced herself and asked who he was.